But Hayslip had already reached Alençon and there had clashed with the 9th Panzer Division. Allied planes and tanks had reduced that division to a battalion of infantry, a battalion of artillery, and only a dozen tanks. The 15th Corps captured Argenton on August 12th after overcoming both German infantry and panzer opposition, and Hayslip reported to Patton that he had taken Argenton with his 2 armored and 2 infantry divisions and was ready to move north to meet the Canadians. Patton, disregarding the boundary line, told him to push on slowly in the direction of Falaise. The American and French forces were now just over 12 miles south of Argenton, while the Canadians, Poles, and British troops were about 22 miles north of it. Seeing no Canadians in the vicinity, Hayslip asked Patton for authority to proceed north across the army boundary line in Argenton. Since the Canadians had made little progress toward Falaise due to strong enemy opposition, Patton allowed Hayslip to push on slowly in the direction of Falaise. An almost 35-mile wide corridor still existed for Cluj's armies to escape through, but instead of rushing to seal off this corridor, both Bradley and Montgomery made decisions that would baffle historians. As 15th Corps patrols slowly reconnoitered north of Argenton on August 13th, Hayslip notified Patton that he believed he could hold the southern shoulder of the pincer between Alençon and Argenton, less than 15 miles south of Falaise. Seeing a gap that desperately needed to be closed, Patton asked Bradley's permission to allow Hayslip to continue northward, but Bradley refused Patton's request when the latter flippantly inquired, should he now continue and drive the British into the sea for another Dunkirk? On August 13th, Bradley, with Eisenhower's approval, gave Patton a stop order. 3rd Army was not to move north of Argenton on the basis of previously arranged army boundaries. This left the Germans, although overextended and vulnerable to entrapment, with only the escape route to the east still open. Bradley then received word that Patton had disregarded his instructions and had sent Hayslip's patrols on past the stop line at Argenton. The patrols had gone 8 miles north of Argenton to within 6 miles of Falaise. Angrily, Bradley not only reiterated his stop order to prevent any movement north of the line, but many sources claim that he also recalled Hayslip's reconnoitering forces to Argenton. A near apoplectic Patton could not believe the rationale for the stop order, namely, Bradley stressing the need to avoid collision between Americans and Canadians, potentially prompting accidental gunfire against each other. Newer boundary lines could have been drawn before any friendly gunfire was exchanged between the Allied units. Additionally, Bradley informed Patton that he was also reluctant to move north of Argenton since he wanted the 3rd Army forces to reinforce the southern shoulder, because he believed that Cluj's German divisions were in the process of pulling out of their Mortagne salient. Finally, in regard to the stop order, Patton insisted that Bradley's headquarters staff, in Bradley's absence, contact Montgomery's chief of staff, Freddy Guinand, requesting permission from the Field Marshal, the Allied Land Forces commander, for Patton to push north. Answering for Montgomery, de Guinand gave a negative reply. The rationale for why Bradley did not allow Patton to let 15th Corps continue north and seal the Falaise-Argenton pocket has been debated ever since. The decision lost what most historians now agree was the best opportunity to encircle the German forces in Normandy and to achieve their complete destruction. Kluge recognized his dire predicament and abandoned any further assault towards Avranches, to which Hitler reluctantly agreed. But Kluge could withdraw to the east on only one major road, and his fear was that a closure of the gap between Argenton and Falaise would leave his eastward-bound armies trapped. During the afternoon of August 13th, Hayslip began to meet increasing German resistance just beyond Argenton as the Wehrmacht's 116th Panzer Division and elements of the 1st and 2nd SS Panzer Divisions from Panzer Group Eberbach blocked 15th Corps' reconnoitering. Some have argued that Bradley's halt order to Patton may have saved Hayslip's 15th Corps from being attacked on its flank by these German panzer forces if the Americans had continued to advance well beyond Argenton. A gap between 25 and 50 miles existed between the 1st Army on 15th Corps' left, as the former was just starting to come up from Mayenne. To the east of 15th Corps, an armored cavalry battalion screened its even more open right flank. This could not have been a reassuring tactical development for Bradley, who seems to have been more concerned with security than encirclement. Bradley stated after the war that he much preferred a solid shoulder at Argenton than a broken neck at Falaise. Bradley was content with the notion that the continued presence of the Falaise-Argenton gap would be an invitation for Kluge's forces to escape through this corridor, where they would be vulnerable to Allied artillery and tank gunfire, as well as seemingly never-ending assaults by American and British air power. Truth be told, Operation Tractable was but a replay of Total Lies with some minor modifications. Beginning just before noon on Monday, August 14th, rather than at night, Simon's relatively new tactics of heavy aerial bombardment and armored infantry carriers were employed again, under a smokescreen as cover, utilizing the Canadian 4th Armoured Division, the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division, and the Canadian 2nd Armoured Brigade. Their goal, after crossing the River Laysan, was to reach Hill 159 to the north of Falaise. The Poles would make a slight flanking move and attack alongside the Canadian 4th Armoured Division.
The German defense was especially tenacious, with Hill 159 not being taken by the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division until August 16. Concurrently, the Canadian 2nd Infantry Division, which was tasked with the capture of Falaise, only reached the outskirts of the town on that day. It would require an additional 48 hours of hard fighting to evict Meyer's 12th SS Panzer Division with its Panzergrenadier units using every bit of rubble as makeshift defensive positions. Despite a good start to Tractable, the usual heavy German fire emanating from the wooded high ground beyond the Laysan caused many casualties among the Canadians, both tankers and infantry. The associated Allied heavy bomber support once again caused hundreds of friendly fire casualties. On August 15, Cloutier disappeared for a day after his staff convoy was hit by Allied fighter bombers en route to German 7th Army Commander Hauser's headquarters. He had spent the day hiding in a ditch. After Cloutier rejoined his C&C West headquarters, he finally received the long-awaited permission to withdraw his troops from the westward salient through the gap eastward to a new line along the River Dives. Cloutier was instructed to return to Berlin. He reasoned that Hitler might have suspected some treachery involved with his absence from his headquarters. Hitler suspected that Cloutier was trying to make a deal with the Allies, along with some innuendo about his remote involvement with the July 20 assassination attempt on the Führer. So Cloutier, fearing merciless punishment by the Gestapo, committed suicide while returning to the German capital. Field Marshal Walther Model, one of Hitler's most reliable generals from the Eastern Front, became the new C&C West. On the evening of August 15, the Polish 10th Mounted Rifles, together with a company of motorized infantry from the 10th Dragoons, Motor Regiment, of the 1st Polish Armoured Division, made it across the River Dives east of Falaise for the Falaise-Argenton Road. The result of the frenetic Canadian II Corps attack during Tractable was to place 2 Allied armoured divisions across the Dives. In an attempt to obey Bradley's order to not move farther north of Argenton, especially with increasing German resistance in that direction by Panzergroup Eberbach, Patton allowed a part of Hayslip's 15th Corps, the 5th Armored and 79th Infantry Divisions, to maneuver east toward the Seine on August 15, leaving the 2nd French Armored Division and the U.S. 90th Infantry Division to form the southern shoulder of the pocket. Hayslip's 2 divisions reached the Seine 48 hours later. On August 16, the Canadian 4th Armored Division joined the 1st Polish Armored Division crossing the River Dives far to the east of the Falaise-Argenton Road, with both Troon and Mount Ormel lying on a southeastern tangent from Falaise. Troon, with its important road junction, was just over 4 miles northwest of another important French village, Chambois. The gains of the Canadians and Poles were hard-won against elements of the 272nd and 85th Infantry Divisions. Bradley was persuaded by Patton on August 14 and 15 to expand 3rd Army's eastward movement to the Seine with the other divisions of XX Corps as well as those of XI Corps. This decision, together with Bradley's earlier order to halt XV Corps' northward advance, continued to deprive the Allied coalition of the opportunity to seal the Falaise-Argenton gap sooner and achieve a more comprehensive victory. In essence, Bradley had effectively abandoned his shorter envelopment for a wider one, and his earlier plan was on the verge of success on August 13 and 14. An ad hoc corps of Patton's American and French forces that remained at Argenton would be joined by the U.S. 80th Infantry Division from XX Corps and be provisionally placed under the command of Major General Leonard Jarrow for a continued northward move from Argenton to link up with Simon's 2 Canadian Corps. This formation would be battling Panzergroup Eberbach, which had moved southward on August 13 for Hitler's proposed drive to the sea to face the American and French forces at Argenton.
Given the reduction in combat power caused by the departure of 2 divisions of 15th Corps and most of their artillery, there seemed to be little chance of closing the Falaise-Argenton gap from the American side. On the suggestion of Montgomery, Bradley, on August 16th, relaunched efforts to shut off the pocket from his Argentan sector with forces that had been greatly reduced in strength. The objective of the American attack would now be a meeting point between the Allied armies in the town of Trun. the U.S. 90th Infantry Division was tasked with the capture of Chambois and crossed the River Dives, which ran through the town. Elements of the 2nd French Armored Division were then to pass through the 90th Infantry Division and drive on Trun, less than 5 miles northwest of Chambois. As the German 7th Army was now methodically moving eastward, with Panzer Group Eberbach defending the southern shoulder of the front near Argentan, Allied fighters, fighter bombers, and medium bombers continually sorted with devastating attacks on the long lines of enemy vehicles and troops, since the Wehrmacht forces now had to move during daylight to get to the River Dives in a timely fashion. On August 17th, the German commanders had observed that the Canadian attack east of Falaise had slackened somewhat, and Panzer Group Eberbach was holding off the Americans on the southern shoulder of the pocket. Hausser and Eberbach were planning that their units would cross the dives over the next 2 to 3 nights. As a result of reassessing the slow progress of the Canadian offensive, it was apparent to the Allied commanders, most notably Montgomery, that Simon's forces would not reach Argentan in time to seal the eastern end of the pocket. The other problem for the Allies was that the Canadians were still more than 15 miles from Chambois on August 16th. Montgomery urged Carrar and Simmons to move the Canadian 4th and Polish 1st Armored Divisions to Trun and then Chambois on the River Dives to close the eastern end of the pocket. At 2:45 p.m. on August 17th, Montgomery issued a new directive for I Canadian Corps to close the remaining gap through which the German forces were escaping by having the 1st Polish Armored Division go past Trun to Chambois at all costs and as quickly as possible. The closing of the gap by both Allied forces was now shifted to Chambois and Trun, both northeast of Argentan on the River Dives. Despite some pockets of resistance manned by elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich that the Poles had to overcome on August 17th and 18th, by the evening of the 18th, 2 Polish battle groups were on the northeastern outskirts of Trun, a short distance from Montgomery's and Bradley's new objective of Chambois. Although Falaise was still a Canadian objective, its significance in the development of the encirclement was diminished as Allied forces shifted eastward. Still, the Canadians had attacked Falaise on August 16th, and the last pockets of resistance there were extinguished by August 18th. On Thursday, August 17th, at 7:30 a.m., Major General George Kitching launched elements of his 4th Canadian Armored Division, which was massed northeast of Falaise, southeastward toward Trun. At nightfall, armored units were a short distance from Trun. The following day, motorized infantry took the town without much difficulty. With the seizure of Trun, I Canadian Corps was finally closer to sealing off the remaining space between the Allied forces. But a narrow passageway still remained between Trun and Chambois on August 18th for the Germans to withdraw north and east to safety. This 4-mile passageway soon would become known as the Corridor of Death. On that day, the German escape route from the ever-shrinking Falaise Pocket was further narrowed to the area between Trun and Chambois along the River Dives. Complicating matters for the retreating Germans was not only the Canadian capture of Trun, but also the 1st Polish Armored Division's capture of the heights of Mount Ormel, a hill 2 miles east of Chambois that overlooked the German escape route through the Dives River Valley. Elements of the 1st Polish Armored Division collided with the ISS Panzer Corps as the latter was heading eastward toward Trun, with specific instructions to keep the escape route open. To prevent getting bogged down in an armored slugfest with the German panzers, the Poles moved east of their intended track and swung south over Mount Ormel to get to Chambois. However, the Polish armor was cutting across the German escape route, and almost continuous combat occurred. General Maciek established his divisional headquarters on Mount Ormel on August 18th in an attempt to close the pocket and bag the 2 Nazi armies. Also on the 18th, elements of Kitching's 4th Canadian Armored Division, which was massed northeast of Falaise, southeastward toward Trun. At nightfall, armored units were a short distance from Trun. The following day, motorized infantry took the town without much difficulty. With the seizure of Trun, I Canadian Corps was finally closer to sealing off the remaining space between the Allied forces. But a narrow passageway still remained between Trun and Chambois on August 18th for the Germans to withdraw north and east to safety. This 4-mile passageway soon would become known as the Corridor of Death. On that day, the German escape route from the ever-shrinking Falaise Pocket was further narrowed to the area between Trun and Chambois along the river dives. Complicating matters for the retreating Germans was not only the Canadian capture at Trun, but also the 1st Polish Armoured Division's capture of the heights of Mount Ormel, a hill 2 miles east of Chambois that overlooked the German escape route through the Dives River Valley. Elements of the 1st Polish Armoured Division collided with the ISS Panzer Corps as the latter was heading eastward toward Trun, with specific instructions to keep the escape route open.
The two main escape routes for thousands of Germans were now a footbridge over the Dives River at St. Lambert, halfway between Trun and Chambois, and a ford at Moissy. The roads exiting the Dives Valley from St. Lambert and the Moissy Ford led up to Mount Ormel, which was now in the hands of Maczek's 1st Polish Armoured Division. On the night of August 19th-20th, the Germans, still trapped within the pocket, again battled to break out to the east, but their way was blocked by the Poles atop Mount Ormel, and some of the fiercest fighting of the war took place. Hundreds of Germans died trying to get around the hill, but Polish gunners had them well sighted in the open country below the heights and showed no mercy. The ground was carpeted with dead soldiers and horses. By morning, the remnants of the German 2nd SS Panzer Corps, trying to keep the pocket open, launched another heavy counterattack, but the Poles held on to their encircled positions atop Mount Ormel, with much-needed ammunition resupply being furnished by air. By late afternoon on August 20th, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps' attack sputtered out. The Poles remained in possession of Mount Ormel. On August 2021, remnants of the German 7th and 5th Panzer armies made last attempts to cross the Dives before the pocket was entirely sealed, while the Canadian 4th Armoured Division fought its way through to relieve Maczek's isolated division atop Mount Ormel. Germans were clawing at each other in desperate attempts to cross the Dives at a bottleneck, the small ford at Moissy. Kurt Meyer, commander of the 12th SS Panzer Division, survived to write, "There was a continual bombardment registering bullseyes every time. The Canadian and Polish guns found our range and could not miss. The whole country was saturated with dead or wounded German soldiers."
After additional Canadian and American reinforcements pushed along the Dives River Valley on August 21st to meet the Poles in Chambois, the Falaise Pocket was finally slammed shut, ending any further chance for the entrapped German forces to escape eastward. Artillery and aircraft pummeled those who remained. It is estimated that 10,000 Wehrmacht soldiers died in the August 6-21 battle, with another 50,000 taken prisoner. This was in addition to about 350 armored vehicles, 2,500 trucks and cars, and 250 towed artillery pieces destroyed or abandoned. Yet the number of Germans who escaped might have been as great as 40,000. The slaughter was horrendous. Soldiers of every rank were sickened by the sights and smells within the Falaise Pocket. One American officer said, "I stood on a lane surrounded by 20 or 30 dead horses, most of them still hitched to their wagons and carts." A Canadian captain recalled, "A German truck had been hit by a shell in the driver's seat. The man's feet were still on the accelerator, but the rest of the body had been blown 20 feet in the air into a tree." A war correspondent noted, "A convoy of vehicles had been surprised by RAF Typhoons. You could walk along them for 330 yards. Each vehicle was a hulk, and the crews were rotting corpses on the verges. This is the type of thing you do not try to describe, but to forget." Even pilots reported being able to smell the stench of the battlefield hundreds of feet above it. Many questions still surround Falaise. From a leadership standpoint, why did Montgomery, who was commander of all the Allied ground forces in France, not close the pincer from the south with the American and French forces at Argentan on August 13, 1944? Why did Bradley, with the Canadian-Polish forces struggling to make gains in their offensive toward Falaise during Operation Totalize, stop Patton's forces from extending past Argentan on August 13th? And why did Eisenhower remain in the background of his 12th and 21st Army Group commanders' decision-making? These are just some of the questions that historians have debated for 7 decades. Montgomery was known for being cautious, and Blummensen described Bradley as one who preferred to take no chances. Many have realized that Eisenhower was a better political general than a tactical or strategic one. The perfect storm in not closing the gap was present in these generals' personalities. This was in sharp contrast to Patton, who espoused a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week.
Montgomery had another pragmatic constraint to deal with. He was reluctant to incur heavy casualties, especially among his British forces, since he had received logistical information from Brooke and Churchill that the United Kingdom was running out of able-bodied men to serve in the military, and that this was becoming a political strain as well as a military one. In fact, during the summer of 1944, Montgomery was informed that he could be supplied with British troops only for about 2 more weeks of fighting. Strategically, Montgomery was also seemingly preoccupied with the much larger envelopment extending to the Seine, rather than Bradley's initial inner one, involving the closure of the Falaise Pocket. On August 4, Montgomery had issued a full-scale directive formally setting the course of action for the Allies as the normal next step after the hedgerow breakout following Operation Cobra on July 25. Identifying the breakout as the disintegration of the enemy, Montgomery envisioned that the Germans' next step would be to pull back to the Seine. This would enable the Allies to seize the area west of the Seine. Based on intelligence reports, Montgomery's plans would take advantage of the lack of bridges over the Seine by pinning the remaining German armies west of the river. On the evening of August 13th, Patton noted in his diary that he could easily advance to Falaise and close the gap, thereby completing the encirclement of the Germans. In another diary entry on August 16th, Patton speculated that the stop order had come from Montgomery's command due to jealousy of the Americans or to the utter ignorance of the situation, or to a combination of the two. While Patton awaited the arrival of the Canadians and Poles from the north, he watched as the Germans built up the shoulders of the gap as German troops and equipment escaped east. On August 17th, a fighter pilot during a sortie noted that the escape corridor within the Falaise Pocket remained open and the whole goddamn German army was moving through the gap. There are other explanations for the delay in closing the Falaise Pocket. Bradley had identified that Falaise was a long-sought British objective, and for them a matter of immense prestige. If Patton's patrols grabbed Falaise, it would be an arrogant slap in the face to the British, at a time when we clearly needed to build confidence in the Canadian Army. In his memoirs, Bradley recounts that by August 13th, he, Eisenhower, and Montgomery had received extensive intelligence briefings which conveyed that the enemy was escaping and that many had already escaped. Bradley described the news as a shattering disappointment, one of my greatest of the war. A golden opportunity had truly been lost. I boiled inside, blaming Monty for the blunder. We had done our part, set the lower jaws at Argenton, and restrained Patton from a brash and foolish overextension. Monty, perhaps too busy with his strategic plans, had turned his part over to the Canadians, an unproven army depending to a great extent on 2 armored divisions, 1 Canadian and 1 Polish, both new to combat. In his memoirs, Bradley also stated after the war, "In halting Patton at Argenton, however, I did not consult with Montgomery. The decision to stop Patton was mine alone." One has to ask why Bradley did not communicate the halt order to Montgomery himself. Thus, the failure to close the Falaise-Argenton gap could be considered a symptom of a dysfunctional chain of command, perhaps reducing Montgomery's role as Allied land forces commander in France, or at least preventing an Allied coalition ground assault on the same objective. In the end, despite knowing about Britain's ebbing manpower, Montgomery should have admitted that his forces could not complete their mission on time and allowed the Americans to close the pocket. The failure of the Allies to close the Falaise-Argenton pocket was thus twofold. First,
Bradley's decision late on August 13th, stopping Hayslip's reconnaissance forces from moving north of Argenton, that was a major reason why so many Germans escaped entrapment and destruction. Second, the failure of the Allies to close the pocket was the result of a lack of adequate communication directly leaked to the personalities of the commanders. Despite a unified command structure, each part of the coalition gave every appearance of fighting its own battle. Bradley gave the impression of ambivalence in his interactions with Montgomery. As for Monty, he knew that his time for directing all the Allied armies was limited, with Eisenhower about to assume overall command of Allied land forces in a matter of weeks. Montgomery, too, knew that with the growing American military strength, he could only attempt to persuade and coordinate how the U.S. Army commanders conducted their tactical movements, rather than issue detailed orders directly. Such was the nature of coalition warfare in France during the Battle for Normandy and later northwestern Europe. Unfortunately for the Allies, it allowed thousands of enemy troops to slip away to fight another day.